Good evening, folks. I have 6 o'clock. We're delighted to have all of you here tonight to join us for this presentation by the Lumber River Council of Governments. This is an official meeting of the town of White Lake. It was adjourned from our prior meeting. At this time, as we normally do, I would ask that you bow your heads for our invocation. Dear Lord, I wish to thank you for giving us the opportunity to gather here this evening to discuss this lake that we love, and to be able to look at some of the problems that we're having with the lake, and to be able to review the information that has been provided to us by the Council of Governments. Lord, we ask as a board and staff that you give us the ability and wisdom and understanding to be able to deal with the problems that we are facing with our lake, and to be able, hopefully, to resolve some of those problems and return the lake to the status that we once knew. Lord, we know you will provide your guiding hand for this purpose, and we thank you for that. Amen.
Amen.
At this time, I would ask any of you who would like to join with us in the Pledge of Allegiance. That's how we normally start our meetings. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Maybe see. At this time, I want to introduce our moderator for the evening, Mr. Eric Hackney, who is the gentleman seated right over here to my right. And I will turn this over to Mr. Hackney as the moderator, so he can kind of give you our procedure and his ground rules on this. And then he'll be turning this over to Mr. Perry with the Lumber River Company. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Can everybody hear me? So my name is Eric Hackney. As the mayor indicated, I'm going to be the moderator for tonight's presentation. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some ground rules that we ask everyone to abide by this evening. First, please cut your cell phones off or place them on vibrate at this time. The lake study presentation will be presented in its entirety before any comments or questions will be taken. At the conclusion of the presentation, those wishing to make a public comment or ask questions will be allowed 3 minutes to do so. At 2 minutes and 45 seconds, I will present a yellow card signifying that you have 15 seconds of time remaining. At 3 minutes, I will present a blue card signifying that your time has expired. I would ask that you stop at that time so that others who wish to speak will have the opportunity to do so. You will be recognized to speak only once. Those wishing to comment or ask questions are asked to speak to the issues and not about individual people. Everyone is asked to give your attention to and be respectful of the individual making the presentation, as well as those who speak during the public comment period, and not engage in sidebar discussions with others in the room. Lastly, I understand the meeting is being recorded this evening and will be available on whitelakewatch.com. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Jim Perry, who is the region planner with the Lumber River Council of Governments.
Good evening. My name is Jim Perry. I'm with the Lumber River Council of Governments. I'm a regional planner. I have worked with the Council of Governments for a long time. I was the executive director from 81 to 2012, retired, semi-retired, and continued on as a regional planner, special projects planner. My background is in water resource planning and some other things. So I have some experience in what we're talking about tonight. I have a couple of colleagues here. Jan Maynard here on the right, running our PowerPoint. Jan is also, she succeeded me as director for a few years, and now she's semi-retired, and we're part of the plan department. And Randy Dagenhart over here. She's recording some stuff for us. She's one of our new trainee planners that we hoped in a year or so that we're just bowing out and she's taking over. We want to thank you for the opportunity to present what is a final draft of a report that we're working on. It's called the White Lake Management Strategic Plan. It is not the Lake Management Plan, and I'll talk a little bit about the difference in that. This study provides a framework for future boards and users as to what issues need to be addressed. There have been a number of meetings, lots of monitoring, suggestions, and opinions. As discussions started about doing a true lake management plan, which is an in-depth, lengthy process to try to put together a strategy for dealing with issues within the lake and so forth. We were approached about doing that. It was our feeling that was something a little beyond our capabilities. However, having been part of the process the last few years, we've done some work, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We felt we had some observations to make, and they were that perhaps before engaging a consultant or whoever to do a true lake management plan, there really needed to be some preliminary work done, some consensus on some issues, looking at certain things and those sorts of things, and try to put those together, some action steps, so that frankly, whoever you hire to do that, if you go that route, that they're not spending the first 6 months or a year doing what we just did, that they can come in and start with some ideas, some concepts of where the town and the community want to go. We have finished the report. Again, it's in a final draft right now because we were waiting until after tonight to hear any comments or suggestions. We have a few others that we are seeking some final comments from. When we are through, which will be in a few days, we will finish the report. We will provide the town with the report, which is a little over 100 pages, including the attachments. There's also a huge stack of supplemental materials, which I'll talk about in a minute, and all that will be given to the town. We will give them some printed copies, and we will give them everything on a flash drive in a digital format. And I think it is their desire that they will put it on the website where anybody can go look at it. So it's a lot of material. I will tell you right now, it'll take probably more than an hour to present this. So I hope you'll bear with me. It is a lot of material, but we hope that it's information you can use, and it will lead to something productive down the road. And you'll pardon me while I read a few things, but I want to make sure I made some points. I want to talk about Lumber River Council of Governments just 1 second. Again, who we are. We are a local government entity. We work for 5 counties and towns within those counties. So Bladen County is one of our members. The COG is celebrating their 50th anniversary this year. So we've been around working for local governments in this region for a long time. I started my career in Bladen County, and White Lake was one of the first places I went to do some work. I want to do some recognitions real quick. Again, I want to talk about just a minute. I've introduced some of our staff. We engaged a couple of folks to help us that were more expert in a couple of fields that we felt like were extremely important. One was Diane Lawrenson, that you know. Diane's here tonight. Diane's been working for the town for the past 4 or 5 years. She's a biologist, knows a lot about aquatic vegetation, biology, lakes, water, all those sorts of things, and certainly is very familiar with the conditions at White Lake. We wanted to get her advice on helping us do the section on water quality. The other person that we engaged is a fellow named Curtis Consalvo. Curtis is a licensed geologist. We've been working with Curtis for over 30 years. Curtis does a lot of hydrogeologic work, in this part of the state. He's done work with us on several occasions and is one of the most knowledgeable people I know about the hydrology and geology of the southern coastal plain and Bladen County. So those were two people that helped us. I want to especially thank a couple of state agencies. Wayne Garner's here tonight, Park Superintendent with the Singletary Lake Management Group. I sought out both DPR, Parks and Recreation, and DEQ staff. I'm going to talk about them a lot later on. They are the two most engaged state agencies with White Lake and the lake. And we ask that they work with us and offer some insights and some information. And so we really want to acknowledge their help and assistance. They were very good about that. We talked with the North Carolina Water Resource Commission. Talk about them a little bit later. Didn't engage them as much because their role really isn't in the areas that we were looking at. So I want to start out with, this is the table of contents, if you will, or the areas within the strategic plan that we worked with. There were, I believe, 7 or 8 different areas that we felt were important. One was state legislation, and I'll again talk about all these at length. The second was a delineation of authority. The third was reviewing that there are some technical issues involved in the lake and what's going on. We wanted to talk about what the key issues we felt were important. We wanted to talk about the connection of the lake and its issues to land use, stormwater management, management capacity for the lake, and at the end, and that's a long section, to give the town and you folks some action steps of things that we feel that you can do. You can start on now and would be things that would be beneficial to the lake. I spent a lot of hours looking at a lot of stuff. You've got to be one of the most studied lakes in the state. It goes back to 1930. There was an article in what was called the State Magazine, which is the precursor to Our State Magazine, if you get that. And it was a one-page article about White Lake, what a nice place it was to come and visit. And that is the first time you see the words that it's a stream-fed lake. And I'm definitely going to come back to that term because I know that's a term that's brought up quite a bit. But in that research, you would be amazed at how many reports, studies, documents were available. I can tell you the stack is over a foot high, more like 2 feet of material from lots of different sectors about lots of different things, but mostly about the water quality and the quantity of things dealing with White Lake. The state archives has a tremendous number of correspondence. Most of it started in the 40s and 50s. And again, I'm going to refer to some of that material later on, right on through recent times. That was some good material to go through. All these things are going to be made available in a digital form for the town. If you have interest to go back and study, some of this material is very enlightening. One thing I can tell you right now, it is the same thing over and over. This is the predicament that you are in and the lake is in right now is not new. This type of stuff that's been happening and we talk about has happened before many times over these decades. And I'm going to bring some of that forward to you. So this position that you're in with the lake, the water quality, lake levels, all those things are not new. Anyway, I wanted to start by going back in time. Sometimes we're so concerned about the present and the future, we ignore the past. I like history and I like going back because I think history has some lessons to tell us and some things that are important. So there's 3 pieces of legislation that I want to alert you to that you may or may not know about, but set the stage for the town and White Lake and the relationship between the two. In 1828, long time ago, the state legislature passed an act that they expressly forbid any landowner that, or anybody anywhere that had a lake covering 500 or more acres within the state could not be, I want to make sure I get that right. It could not be recorded for private ownership. I think that if you look back, that was probably the first step by the state of North Carolina to set aside public lands for recreation and enjoyment by the people. I don't know that that was their feeling, but it seems that way. In 1911, they came back and they specifically passed some legislation dealing with Bladen County. And that legislation was to secure to the people of the state of North Carolina the use of the lakes of Bladen, Columbus, and Cumberland County. They went on to say that White Lake, Singletary Lake, Black Lake, Lake Waccamaw, and others containing 500 or more acres shall never be sold, conveyed to any person, firm, or corporation, that shall always remain property of the state for use and benefit of all the people of the state. I can tell you that legislation has been upheld by the state attorney general on a number of occasions, and that's still true. So, and the last piece for us, talk a little bit more, is that they changed it from 500 acres and a couple of years later to 50 acres. So the key takeaway from that is White Lake belongs to the people of North Carolina. It is a public trust. It belongs to everybody, and that is why the state parks and DEQ and all those people are involved. So I think you need to keep that in mind as we go along. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But those are some key pieces of legislation. I want to move on to what we call the delineation authority. There's 4 basic groups that deal with what's going on and happening day to day around the lake. 3 of them are state agencies and 1 of them is the town. So you have the town of White Lake, and we'll talk about each of these. The second I mentioned earlier, the North Carolina Department of Parks and Recreation, the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, and the North Carolina Water Resources Commission. The town has authority to what's called the high water mark. There is a level around the lake. There's an imaginary line that goes around the lake that signals where that high water mark is. And I keep saying we're going to come back to stuff, but we are. So we don't see that line, but it's very important. White Lake was chartered in 1951. They since had a consolidation of their charter. I'm not sure if I remember when, but anyway. So it is a municipality of North Carolina. And municipalities in North Carolina have a broad range of things that they are authorized to do. They can create their own ordinances dealing with certain things within the town, like zoning. They establish and operate utilities like water and sewer systems, stormwater systems. They enact local ordinances, land use regulations. That's where their authority is and the things that they do and can do as a municipality. And those are really important. We're currently working with the planning board. We've worked with them for the last few years. One thing, one of our other colleagues worked with the board, and I'm not sure, I don't know all the planning board members. There's some here tonight, but they work. Our colleague Gene worked with them to update their zoning ordinance. The state passed some new legislation that required every county and town in the state to conform to some new rules for zoning. So that was a long process, but the town in just a couple of years ago updated their zoning ordinance. The other part of that is a requirement is that every town and county do what's called a comprehensive plan. When you've been in something a long time, you see things come and go again. They just changed the name. In the old days, we would have called this a comprehensive land use plan. or some other name like that. But now it's called a comprehensive plan. But what it really is, it's a roadmap for the planning board in the town about where the town would like to see development, what they see in the future. My colleague Jan, that's her role with the planning board, and they've been working on that. And this strategic plan is a module of that comprehensive plan. In fact, they've stopped work temporarily till we got through with this piece, but this piece will be a part of that work that they're undertaking and doing right now. So it's on its way, and a very important piece of work that they're doing. If the town wants to do anything involving the lake, they have to seek permission from the appropriate state agency. So that's why it's important to have a good relationship with those people. They have the authority that over the lake. The town's footprint around the lake is significant. A lot of development. You can go back through again, old aerial photographs of White Lake, all the way back to the 30s and 40s when there was just a little bit of area developed. And over time, you see that development spreading. And basically now it's developed all the way around the lake, except the old Tilden acreage here on the northwest side of town near Turtle Cove. So that's kind of a little bit about the town. They have certain rules, authority, things that they can do and control that do affect the lake. The major state player is Parks and Recreation. They are charged by statute and by regulations. They're in charge of monitoring the state park system, and White Lake is part of the state park system. And that's why you see Lane and his folks over here, because that's part of their job. They're responsible for conservation and protection of natural and ecological resources within the state parks. They promote recreational and educational opportunities, and they're the stewards of the state's natural resources. White Lake, as I mentioned earlier, is a part of the Singletary Lake Group, along with Bay Tree, Singletary Lake, Salters Lake. They are all part of that group management group. Their day-to-day tasks include a lot of looking at the piers, the seawalls or bulkheads, the buoys. They go around and inspect those things. They either write permits or licenses for things like buoys and extensions of piers. They're responsible for general management duties of the park. And they right now have some oversight over the outlet at Turtle Cove. And there's a lot more about that in a little bit. So just as an example, they're currently monitoring 298 piers around White Lake. That's up 6% from 1996, 445 buoys. That's the legal ones, up 56%, and seawalls and bulkheads, they monitor 151. That's up 59% from 1996. They have a small staff and a huge inventory of assets that they have to monitor. So when you multiply that by all the other lakes too. So they are out there, they're working hard, and they take their responsibilities seriously. I met with two of the state agencies, Parks and Rec and the DEQ people. They were very, very nice. One of the first things I wanted to do was sit down with them, talk with them about what they did, what they felt like some of the issues were, and those sorts of things. And they were very accommodating. Spent a lot of time with them. And so I asked Parks and Rec what some of the issues were that they saw with the lake. And so talking a little bit about those to put them in some context for later, probably number one was access to White Lake. They have 0.06 acre easement and pier on the south side of the lake. That is the only access that they have to the lake. So every other lake in North Carolina has public property access next to that lake. Vary in sizes, but there's some park area, land area, and that they use for access. These folks have very little access to the lake. The high water mark, it's difficult to enforce something if you don't know where the boundary is. And that's something that they see as important. Public access. Again, I hate to harp on that. Let's go back to the state legislation. State legislation, that's a public trust out there. It is meant for the public of North Carolina, and yet there is no real public access that is not controlled by commercial or other individuals' private property. There's been a lot of discussion over the years about acquiring some land, but there really isn't much except for the little bit of land that Parks and Rec has. Seawalls and bulkheads. There's been a proliferation of those over the years, and also watercraft that they feel has resulted in some congestion, safety issues, water quality issues. There's something called riparian rights in North Carolina that has to do with water bodies and private property. The easiest way to explain, give an example of this, is North Carolina's coast. We're very fortunate in North Carolina. We have lots of public access to the beach, and the beach belongs to the public up to the high water mark. In California and some other states, if it's not a public access or a public beach, you don't walk on anybody else's beach. They own to the water body. So we're very fortunate in North Carolina that that's the way we see it. The other part of that is riparian rights that is important is that you are not supposed to interfere with the natural migration of a water body's area. So in other words, when you put a seawall up around the lake, there may be occasions where the natural order of things would have been that lake might have moved that direction and you're blocking that. Nobody's going to make you rip out a bulkhead, but those are things that are important. That's things that are important to them to understand. But seawalls and bulkheads are an issue. And we'll come back to those in a little bit. The access to the Turtle Cove outlet, we'll talk about this later. That's a really, really, really important asset. It is the only way that water flushes out of the lake. It's on private property. Nobody owns it. That asset needs to be owned by somebody, either the town or the state. And not only that outlet, but the ditch that that drains from those pipes to Highway 53. That needs to be in public control. If it's not, and it's closed down, you've got a serious issue with, you don't have many outlets at all. You have one. And as far as mixing the water, allowing the water to mix, having a hurricane come through and dump 20, 25 inches of rain on you, if it's not got anywhere to go, it's going to come up on your property. So it serves a lot of purposes and is important. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Environmental quality, we've met with those people. They're in charge of environmental protection and quality of the state's surface and groundwater. They monitor permits that are issued by the agency or the Environmental Management Commission. They conduct other regulatory enforcement. They evaluate water quality by taking samples. They develop water quality standards, rules, and management strategy, provide educational awareness. They test for algae toxicity. And if samples prove toxic, it is their job to turn it over to the Bladen County Health Department. It is not their job to remediate toxic algae. It is the health department's job that if they find that whatever is in that algae is harmful to humans, they're the ones that have the authority to restrict use of the lake or even close it down. DEQ is a regulatory agency, not a restoration agency. My colleague and I had a discussion today about what that meant. They are there, it's like the algae. They are there to take samples, test, those types of things. It is not in their wheelhouse. It's not their job to remedy the algae situation. They don't look at it that way, and that's just not in their charge. So a lot of times they feel like, and I'm paraphrasing from what way they say it, they think that they can come out here and people want them to get rid of the algae or different things in the lake. They don't have the authority to do that. They don't have personnel to do it. So that's what they mean about a restoration agency. Theirs is only there for regulatory purposes. They monitor surface runoff within the roads circling the lake. And their staff is in the Fayetteville Regional Office, and they know White Lake very well. Within that department is another little group that's called the Division of Water Resources, and it's their job they're responsible for monitoring water quantity and quality in surface and groundwater. They're responsible for monitoring groundwater. It's a significant source of water for the southern coastal plain. Soapbox time. We are so lucky. You see other parts of the state suffering from drought. People are running out of water. Underneath our ground, we have an aquifer system that's very healthy. And right now, there's a lot of good, clean water down there. And Jan's heard me say this a number of times. Sometimes Eastern North Carolina gets looked at, I think, as, we're just a pass through to the beach. We've got a resource that other parts of the state are going to try to come get one day. And so we need to protect that resource because it's really important. They're also responsible for monitoring droughts. So those folks, you don't see them, but they do have a purpose and they do affect some things that go on. I'll give you one big example. Smithfield Foods, when they came, were using groundwater. They drilled several wells into the deeper aquifer system. They were pumping at that time about 3 million gallons a day. I don't have that map with me, but what happened is the level of the aquifer began dropping, and the state became very concerned. There are 11 counties in the central part of North Carolina that happened some years ago, and the state established what's called a capacity use area. Those 11 counties had to find alternative resources and cut their dependence on groundwater because they were dewatering the aquifer. They were taking out more than it could refill. They were threatening to do that for Bladen County. Fortunately, local governments around here working with the COG, Bladen County, talked to Smithfield about, look, we don't want to allow that to happen. What can we do? And if you ride along 87 and you see this facility going north on the right-hand side that says Lower Cape-Fear Water and Sewer Authority, that's a surface water intake that now supplies water to Smithfield. And the day they cut off those wells, there's a monitoring well nearby, that downward arrow went up. And that's good. So we didn't want to lose a industry that was important to the county, but we didn't want to suffer the consequences environmentally either. D's, Q's, issues, if you will. They have no authority ability to directly address the algae and aquatic vegetation issues. They don't have the regulatory responsibility. They don't have the capacity to do that. So that is, but they know it's important, but that's just not something they can do. Turtle Cove Outlet is important to them. They see the importance of having that outlet for environmental reasons, and they support the same way parks people do. They support seeing that out or another outlet come under the control of either the town or somebody. Exfiltration and infiltration of wastewater. They recognize the town is working on a replacement program for the collection system that goes around the lake. The oldest parts of that collection system were built 1960, 61. So they've got some age on them, and they leak. They leak in and they leak out, depending on the level of the groundwater. And so they're replacing, when they are through, they will have replaced about 26,000 feet of really old line. That's great, because that line is cracked, it's separated, and when the water table is high, water is seeping into those leaks and going to the wastewater treatment plant, and the town is paying extra to treat that water because they're treating whatever comes into the system. When the water table is low under those pipes, then that's raw sewage is seeping out into the groundwater, and some of it is potentially migrating to the lake. So they recognize what they're doing, and they appreciate that the work that's being done, and it is really important. Monitoring stormwater and other outfalls into the lake. Again, without a true public access, it's very difficult for them to monitor what's going on as far as stormwater. They know it's an issue. They would like to help with that, but their hands are a little bit tied on that. Wildlife Resources Commission, they were created to conserve and sustain the state's fish and wildlife resources. The biggest thing that they have related to White Lake is they're the people who issue boat permits. That is the agency that does that. They don't regulate them, they just issue the permits. So they're important. Their big deal is, again, fish and wildlife. And the only issue that they really have, and it's not an issue, they just realize that White Lake is suddenly, because of the chemistry of the water, the species of fish have changed, and there are new species in the lake, some bigger fish, and there are a lot of fishing going on, and there's even some tournaments happening. That's good for the local economy. They really don't have an issue with that. They just monitor that type of situation. So that's a little bit about the three agencies, two of which are really important in the town. It is those three entities that are going to decide what the future of White Lake is. So that's why they're important. Areas of concern. We're going to make sure that we touched on what we thought and recognized were what people were most concerned about. As part of the comprehensive plan that Jan's working on, we put out a survey along with the planning board. Planning board were really involved in that. They did a yeoman's job of getting that online, putting it out there, paper versions. We got almost 600 responses. I got to tell you, that is phenomenal. We're lucky in some towns that we get 20 or 30, and you got 600. Not only did they return them, but they had a lot of comments. And that was great. That gives the planning board a lot of information that some towns just, they have to beg to get. So it really surprised us, but it also helped us between that survey, some of the past public meetings that have taken place over the years, and some other inputs. It was pretty easy to look at what the top issues were. And those are listed right there. The quality of the lake water, the clarity of the lake water, the water level in the lake. Those three outpaced every other one by a long shot. Right behind them was overdevelopment of the lakeshore and lack of public access. But those top three were just about on everybody's list. And so that was interesting. I think it echoes what we've heard, that's where the public's concern is about those issues. So that helped us focus again on what we were doing. It made us confident that we were heading the right way and doing the right, examining the right issues. Now we're going to get technical. I'm going to use some props and so forth. The three top issues, which were the quality of the lake, the clarity of the water and the lake level, and the hydrogeology, are complicated issues. When you get down to it, they're not real complicated, but they are. When you talk to Diane or my friend Curtis, they can get in the weeds and you're going, whoa, that's a little bit more than I want to know. Can you explain it a little easier. So the sections of the plan, and these are the longest section in the report, look at examining the hydrogeology around White Lake. And I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit. The lake water levels, the quality of the lake water, and then a detailed analysis of each of these and a little bit more about them. So I'm going to start with talking about groundwater, and I'm going to step aside for a minute and put up a couple of props. This is in sad shape because I have taken that thing around to many meetings over the last couple of decades to see somewhere. This is the trees. They saw this work at the college. They said, you won't be north of Green. You better go find something else to do. So I want to talk about groundwater. I want to talk about the key findings that we had and then get into this a little bit. Well, I'm going to do this first. So I have one meeting, and I think this picture is on the website, the White Lake Watch website. This was some work that we did in early 2000 to try to understand what under the surface looked like. We knew that we were getting our water from what are called aquifers, but we didn't know what that looked like. So Curtis and some people that our agency and our 5 counties and including Columbus and Sampson County, we had 7 counties involved, contracted with a large firm, hired some other folks, worked with state agencies to do a lot of different things, studies and reports and information gathering. But one of the things that we were most interested in, what does it look like? All we see is what we see on the ground. This is basically, if you took a knife and sliced the earth and lifted it up, this is what it looks like on the side. And so I'm going to try to make this too hard. And I'm sorry that you can't see this, but maybe you can come up and look at it a little bit later. Starting at the fall line, the Piedmont, where Moore County, 95, if you will, a little bit west of 95, starting there, the streams and creeks and all these little things like that are the beginning of the aquifer system, those things on the surface. What happened over the years, and many thousands and thousands of years, is when the Ice Age came and the water level and left. Oh. Then they came back in. Ice melted like it's doing now. Seawater rose, and the ocean went into the fall line. And when it left again, it deposited sand, pieces of shell. If you had been around a well driller and he's drilling you a well, ask him for some of the material he pulls out. I have a couple of bodies. If you look at it, you see sparkles in it. That's little fragments of shells. It's sand and those types of things. And then the water receded and left that. And what happened? The rivers began flowing. And what did the rivers bring but clay from the Piedmont? And what you had was a layer of clay build up on top of that sand. The water came in again, dropped in more, posited more sand and shells. It went back out. Rivers flowed, clay formed on top of it. So what you have is several layers of that happening. This broad area right here is bedrock. You dig down far enough in the earth, you're going to hit rock. And so this rock goes up toward the west and surfaces into the mountains and that sort of thing further in. And what we are left with are these lines. I know you can't see. which form what are called confining units. You have a layer of clay, you have a layer of sand and shell on top of it, then you have another layer of clay. Over many, many years, water migrated into that sand. So people think of an aquifer, well, it's a river underground. No, it's not quite that. It's all that sand material and the water's between all those particles. And that's what's making the aquifers. And so in our neck of the woods, which we're about right here, we have basically two, although there is a third, we have three. We have what's called the Upper Cape Fear. We have a confining unit that's pretty thick. We have what's called the Black Creek. Anybody that's got a well here, a deep water well, you are probably screened and your pipe goes down to one or both of those. Most of us, mine goes down 200 feet and it's in the Black Creek. It's again, a great source of water. The pink area is the sand, is dirt that's out there on top of the Black Creek Aquifer confining unit of clay. If you go out there and take a shovel and dig deep enough in your yard, water will come through. And it all depends on how much rain we've had, how saturated the soil is, as to how much and how deep that hole is. If we've had 20 inches of rain, you don't have to dig very deep before that hole fills up with water. If we're in a drought, you got to dig pretty deep. But that water is called the superficial aquifer. We define it as the saturated soils above that first confining unit. And it starts in the fall line, and it's fairly thin, but it thickens out as it goes toward the coast. The other thing about the aquifer system, the water all flows to the southeast. All that water is flowing very slowly. Long time for that water to flow, even a short distance. Doesn't take long when you stick a pipe down to draw it out, but it takes a long time to migrate. Some of that water's been carbon dated. It's tens of thousands of years old. And so it's really old. And it's again why we need to soapbox again. It's why we need to protect that, because we lose that. It takes a long time to, if you will. I want to speak to the superficial aquifer a little bit because I want to go to my wonderful artwork over here. And if I can make sense out of this, I will be doing a lot. So the bottom piece of this is the Black Creek Aquifer. And that black line is that confining unit. That confining unit's pretty thick, several feet thick. It varies in thickness where you're at. And above that is the superficial aquifer. This green line is the top of the surface, if you will. This is northwest of us, where it's a little bit higher. This is over the other side of 701, all the way to the southeast, which is where it's lower. The topography is that it's higher there, it's a little lower here. That orange line I'm going to come back to. The green line is the bottom of the lake. It's just the depression that is here. The Bay Lakes, if you look at them in an aerial photograph, they're all elliptical. They're all basically the same. Don't want to debate how they were formed, but they have a bottom. They're able to collect water, and they're different depths. But let's say we're talking about White Lake, and this blue up here is the water for White Lake. The orange line is what's called a clay hardpan. Underneath the lake is a layer of clay. It's not a confining unit. It only exists. We don't know how far it exists. It's not like the confining unit for the aquifer. It's just around this area. We don't know the full extent of it, but it's there. The water that's flowing when it's a hard rain and the water is in the ground, And we're looking at the northwest area, and that's where the berry farms are and some other stuff. The more rain that falls and soaks that soil, it creates what's called hydraulic pressure. That water is going to start migrating, and the more water you have up there, the more push. And it's pushing that water southeast. So when it comes to that clay hard pan on the northwest, it goes over it, it goes under it. And so it's going on both sides and it reemerges on the other side. So the water for the lake, talk about this some more. There's two principal places it comes from. Rainfall is the biggest, but the other source is groundwater. And this water that's flowing by is coming up through the bottom of the lake. On the sides of the lake, it is entering, groundwater enters the lake. We can't tell you how much. It's significant, but I couldn't sit here and tell you it's 25%. We don't know, but it's some amount, it's important. That if we're going to look down on top of the lake. If you look down and could see that hard pan of clay, it doesn't exist the whole perimeter of the lake. In some places, it goes out beyond the lake to the shore. There's a significant area in the northeastern part that there isn't a hard layer of clay. It's not there. That is the area where the springs are. That is why the springs have a feel of water coming through. They are just, I think, an anomaly of sand, a cylinder of sand that goes down into the superficial aquifer. The hydraulic pressure is what's forcing that water up through those springs. When you go out there and you feel it really flowing, it's probably been raining. It's probably got a high hydraulic pressure, and that's why you feel it that way. When it's not feeling very much coming out, the likelihood is we're in a drought. There's not much water flowing in the ground, or the level is dropped. Therefore, the volume coming out is dropped. So I don't want to get in an argument about it, but they are not the source of water for the lake in the sense that they are it. They are important and they exist, but the whole superficial aquifer is important. It flows by, it flows over that hard pan. That's the water, groundwater that's flowing into the lake. And again, when we have a severe drought, that's one of the contributing factors to why the lake level drops. If you ride around any farm pond and look, their ponds are down too. They're suffering from the same effect that the lake is suffering from. You have a bigger area, so you're going to suffer more evaporation than a small pond is. But that's giving you some background into the geology, the hydrology, what's going on. So in our study, person Curtis does a lengthy explanation of that. He offers a lot of information. That information comes from well logs, from wells that have been drilled around the area. When the well drillers come in, they drill a hole in the ground, they pull core samples out, and they can tell by looking at it exactly where they are in the aquifer system. And they do a log in a well book, and that's how they know where to put the screens, because they just don't stick a pipe down. That pipe's got screens in it that sandy area flows into to go up the pipe. And that hydraulic pressure is great enough that it forces that water a little bit up the pipe, and you stick another pipe down, that's how you pump that water out. So anyway, he talks about that a little bit, but it's important to know that that is the two, rainwater and groundwater are the two principal sources of the lake water. And so protecting groundwater is important. When I have one more, and this is in the PowerPoint, I think. This is another view, and I know it's hard to see, but this is the lake here. This area to the north and northeast that's shaded, that's really the recharge area for the lake. Now, water's flowing from all around. Anywhere that's that dark brown or orange, that's basically the recharge zone for the lake. And it's flowing out here. This is the southeast part at the bottom. So that water gets under the lake and finishes, it's gone, it's heading toward the river and eventually toward the coast. That's where all our groundwater goes. Okay. And they know this too, because there have been occasions where people have been out there and actually sunk a pipe into the lake. And that's where they found around the springs that clay wasn't there. They could put that pipe down 21 plus feet and did not hit the clay. And that clay's hard enough. You can ask the people to build piers. They know because they hit that clay and it's really hard. They use it at basically it's the pier up. So they know that there's certain areas that clay layer doesn't exist. We just never mapped it out, but it does exist. So a couple of other points about this. We talked about the wastewater collection system and infiltration and inflow. Again, infiltration is when the water table is high enough, it's over those sewer pipes and it's going into those cracks into the pipe, going to the wastewater treatment plant. And exfiltration is when the level of the water is low enough that sewer's leaking out. So that's kind of the in and out of that. I want to get to the berry farms because that's another issue. They are northeast, northwest, the northern part, past the lake, past 701. There's been a lot of talk and debate about the effect of the berry farms. Feels like, and he's looked at the numbers, looked at the statistics, looked at the reports. His feeling is that if they have an effect, it's fairly minimal, but he won't dismiss the fact that they may have some effect on the flow of groundwater into the lake. The problem is we don't have enough quite. And one of the things that Curtis gave us at the end of his work was a strategy, if you will. If the town wants to pursue more definitive answers about this question, here's what you do. You put in some wells here, here, and here, this level, this deep, monitor them. You get somebody who knows what they're doing. They could figure out a little more accurately what's really going on. But he still feels like that may not prove much more, and that really, despite the fact that they are using groundwater, that he thinks that's a minimum effect. And it's not just the wells that they're pumping. He's a little more concerned about, if you look at an aerial photograph, you see a lot of ponds, irrigation ponds. It's not that they pump water in there, it's that it's just like the lake, they evaporate. And when they evaporate and they need it, then they will pump some water in it, but build it up so they can use it to irrigate. But again, it's an area that we don't know enough about, but I trust his opinion and feel like it's fairly minimal. And one day you may want to spend the money. The town may want to actually look at that a little bit more. And the last thing about that is that there's other people using the aquifer. There are people like the town that has deep water wells into the Black Creek and the Upper Cape Fear. Those don't have any effect on the surface. When those wells are drilled and they punch through that clay layer, they put grout around the pipe to seal it. If it wasn't there, then water could go up and down between the two aquifers, but good well drillers do their work, that doesn't happen. The other thing that exists out there, there are some small surficial wells. I don't know how many around the lake. Back in the day before you had a water system, that's where you got your water. But there may be a few around, and he doesn't feel like that those have really much effect at all. So anyway, that's a little bit about that. So I want to talk about the lake water levels, and I'm going to go back in time again. Some of this started about ditches back in the 50s. Two fellows at the northwest part of town on the outside of White Lake Drive wanted to dig some ditches to drain their land. And it got to be pretty heated. You can go back and read the letters. Folks from White Lake wanted them stopped. They asked the state to come in. The Attorney General got involved. The two were that they did not feel that those ditches were deep enough that they were having an effect on the lake. And the Attorney General wrote an opinion that says that's on private property and it's not a thing the state can do about it unless they're proven to cause substantial damage. So there were a couple of pieces of legislation I'm not going to really dwell on. There was one about an act prevent digging of ditches below a certain level in Bladen County. It's unlawful to dig a ditch under 701 or 53 or White Lake Drive below 66 feet above sea level. 66 feet, 65, whatever, there is some level that's being talked about. I talked about that. I want to move on to water quality. That's the other biggie. White Lake, as you know, is very small, very shallow bay. The average depth 6.2 feet. There is no surface inlet. What makes White Lake unique, as most of you know, there's no inlet into the lake. Every other lake is tea-colored because water from its neighboring wetlands or water bodies migrate into the lake. You don't have that. Except for groundwater and rainwater, that's what your lake is filled in with. So it's what makes the Clarity unique. If you want to go back in time and have been here long enough, you may remember that folks over at Bay Tree Lake back in the day stopped the water from the neighboring watershed from coming into the lake, dammed it up, drained the lake, took out all the vegetation, put some sand down, and then later on the dam failed, the water came, and the water was clear for a while because they made that water go around the lake. The dam broke and that was the end of that. As soon as the water went in there, it turned back just like that. So the water's there because it's colored because of the organic material that's rotting in the bays and so forth. It's not anything unusual, but it's what makes White Lake a muddy sediments make up the bottom about half of the bottom, and then white sand basically around the perimeter. But the basically the middle of the lake is muddy sediments. Sediments are organic material that have just over time settled on the bottom. They're very important in the sense that they contain a lot of nutrients. The top 1 inch of that sediment contains phosphorus and some other materials that if stirred up, they can, I got one over here, thank you, yeah. They can accelerate growth of vegetation. During a 3-year period of 2019 to 21, the high water level in the lake, which is 65 feet, and that means we need rainfall to keep that up. Lake levels can drop 4 to 5 inches a month, depends on the rain. Severe droughts, 2 feet. You go back to the 50s, I'm going to use another prop. Give me a minute here. In the 50s, there was a lot of concern the lake had really dropped 2 feet. People were upset. The town was upset. They were upset with the state. State came in and said, it's happening everywhere. It was a drought. This is a map of 52, I think, or somewhere in the late 50s. All that dark area, the whole southern part of the country was in a severe drought. It was so bad in North Carolina that a whole growing season across the state was wiped out. So, I mean, that's pretty bad. Everybody was suffering. As soon as the rain came, it filled back up and everybody was happy. From 19 to 21, the range in lake levels from highest to lowest was 21 feet. That's a big range of difference between low and high. So again, you've got no inlet and you only have one outlet. You're dependent on what's going on with the rain. I warned you this would take a little while. I've been reminded that I'm taking too long. Water quality, one of the big things that's been happening is the change in the pH. If you have a swimming pool, you know what pH is. You have a little thing that you put pool water in, you drop some drops in there and it's going to turn red or brown. If you got too much pH, you have to put one chemical in. If it's too low, you put some other chemicals in to balance it out. The pH range is 0 to 14. 7 is neutral. Historically, White Lake was below 7 for a long time. And then all of a sudden it hit a period of time where, as you see on that chart on the screen, that level of pH increased quite a bit. It was mostly due to acid rain. Acid rain, big deal, number of decades ago. It's caused by a chemical reaction where compounds like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides are released into the air. They become part of the water and it comes in rainfall. When the country decided that they would clean up the coal-fired utilities and the smokestack legislation came into effect, that completely changed. That source of pollution, if you will, and effect on the pH disappeared. What has taken its place is nitrogen and ammonia. All of a sudden, it's the same problem. We have rain that's full of ammonia, if you will, a high in pH material, chemical, and that is part of the rain. And that has been measured all across this area, and it's been increasing. And so instead of having that pH level go back down, it's continued to stay high. The high pH level encourages algae and aquatic vegetation to grow. So getting that pH down, getting control of the nutrients like phosphorus and those types of things in the water are really important. I'm not going to get into all the chemistry, but suffice it to say that there are nutrients coming into the lake from a lot of different sources. Some you can control, some you can't. We can't control from White Lake what's in the rain. And so, did you have the map? I've lost me. Map with the United States. So this is a telling map right here. This is a map done by EPA, and you see that black arrow, and you see that brown area in southeastern North Carolina. These are levels of nitrogen in the rain. It's across major parts of the country, and you can see we're right in the bullseye. So I'm not going to get into what causes that, but it's something that, again, you don't have much control over at this level. But there is something going on, and we've replaced one pollutant, if you will, with another. I want to talk about nutrients for just a minute. One of the largest contributors of nutrients, and nutrients are anything that's stuff like debris, pollutants type things that have dropped on the ground, paper, anything that goes in the stormwater system, runoff from cars and vehicles, the dogs in the yard, cats in the yard, the ducks out and waterfowl on the lake. All those things are contributing to the nutrients that are going into the lake. Stormwater is one of the most important ones. We did a study a couple of years ago for the town. We identified 50 pipes that were around the lake and tracked them back. They're basically draining parking lots, yards. And while that doesn't seem really important, it's what those pipes are gathering from different sources. I'll use an extreme example. DOT has a retention area up White Lake Drive north of here going towards 701. They collect all the rainwater in ditches, and all that rainwater goes to that retention area. And then they have a couple of pipes going under the highway and a ditch that goes right into the lake. And if you go look at that water, it's tea colored. It's been sitting in that vegetation. That kind of contributing thing into the lake is one of the things that's affecting the clarity of the lake. And the more nutrients that go into the lake, and if you look at this later on in the report, you can get really in depth about what those things are. The more of those going in, the more likely you're going to have growth of algae, the more likely that you're going to have discolored water and all those things that are affecting water quality. So getting a system in place that can deal with taking that storm water away from the lake is important. It's something that the town hopefully can work on and do something with. The other big contributor are the sediments down at the bottom of the lake. When you run a big boat or anything over the bottom of the lake, and those propellers tear up the bottom of the lake or they get torn up in any way, they do two things. One, they make the water go down because that stuff is suspended in the lake water. Second, it releases a tremendous amount of nutrients like phosphorus. That stuff has settled there, and when it's stirred up, you might as well have thrown some liquid fertilizer out there in the lake. So not a popular topic, not one that everybody agrees on, but it's something that the town's going to need to wrestle with if they're really going to make an impact. Quality of water of the lake. There are places in the country that have suffered the same situation. And we've given in this report an example of what you could do. They call it a recreational capacity use formula. And I won't go into the numbers about that, but it's basically looking at how many boats can we reasonably accommodate in this area. And they work out a formula where they rotate how many boats are on the lake. It's one tool that the town could use working with the state to maybe figure out a way to limit the number of boats. But you know yourself, the lake is only so deep in certain parts. There's a lot of shallow area and the boats have gotten bigger. You can go back, again, I told you history repeats itself. You can go back to the 1930s and almost every study and report that's been done talks about watercraft being a problem. So it's not a new thing. It's something that's just been there. We don't have the answer. We have some thoughts and recommendations. But if you're really going to make an impact, that's one area along with stormwater that you're going to have to think about doing something. There's some screenshots of stuff you've seen, the algae blooms, the mats of dislodged vegetation. When that aquatic vegetation gets torn up, it just floats on the surface, congregates, rots and washes up on the shore. Again, what's tearing that vegetation up is the disturbances in the lake, the wave action and all those things. It's an issue. Talked about that. Okay, I want to talk about land use for just a minute. And I didn't use this earlier. All the blue area around this lake, that area drains into the lake. That's the topography of the lake. That's all that land that you see in blue. Anything that's water, whatever, it's going to migrate to the lake. That's the zone that you need to know about. One of the tools that the town has in its arsenal of trying to deal with things like development, so forth, is zoning ordinance. Again, the zoning ordinance has been updated. Stormwater is important. That map is showing impervious surfaces, driveways, parking lots. The redder the area, that means that area is significantly covered by material that is not allowing rainwater to discharge through the ground. That water is running off into a ditch or it's running into the lake. I noticed that the church across the way, they've got a gravel parking lot. That's the kind of thing you need to think about doing a little bit more of. Not so much paved areas. You've got a delicate balance between the ecology and the development. It's a tricky thing, but something like this can really make an impact in the future. So the town's aware of that. And that's an issue that certainly want to look at. Management in the future, there's really, the telling thing is going to be, can you establish a good cooperative working relationship with the state? Again, there's three parties. There's you, Parks and Rec, and DEQ. You've got to work together in order to solve some of the basic and most important problems facing the lake. If you can't, then it doesn't really matter what you do as a town. If you can't work with them, you're really not going to get anywhere. They have limitations about what they can do. But I asked them that question when I met with them. If the town was really serious about doing a lake management plan and they came to you, would you be willing to work with them? I'm going to be truthful. They didn't say this to me, but I've been around a long time. I know what it's like to have been constantly abused. And I think they feel like that there's been times where they've been beat up. And I've been in some of those meetings where that happened. I think that it's to behoove the town to be the first one to stand a hand and say, we need to work together. They're not going to come to you. You're going to have to go to them. So they're going to be really important to establish and build that relationship. Or if you're going to do a true lake management plan, it's not going to be effective because you don't control so much of the area that needs to have things done. So working together with some partners, and they are two key ones that's really going to be important. There's a lot of action steps in here, and I know that I have extended beyond probably what I said would be the time, but I encourage you to read those. Those have been given to the board. They will be. This is the end of the report. These are things in here that can be accomplished. They can be the stepping stone for making some headway and doing some things that make a difference. and they're actionable type things that can be done. You don't have to wait where we're going to do a lake management plan to do some of these. These are things that can be done now. So I've gone on a long time. I knew this would take a long time. Sean was very nice the other day. I talked to him for 2 hours about this. And so knew we had a lot of information. Again, we are going to make this available. The town's going to make this available. I encourage you to read it, study it, and be thoughtful about working together. If you don't, you have no future for the lake. The lake's going to continue to deteriorate. And I know as property owners and visitors, nobody wants to see that. You know, it would be a catastrophic problem and result for the whole county, not just White Lake. And so, you know, we encourage you to try to work together and try to see if you can't do some of the things that need to be done. As some of the people that responded to the survey, there was a lot of, I remember when the lake was really good, and I remember all that. That was repeated numerous times. People are with you. They would like to see that happen, but it's going to be in your hands, and it can't all be the town board. It's got to be the public. So I'm going to end and turn it back over to the moderator. We're going to take questions, suggestions, comments. If you don't have one for this group right now, then I'm willing to stay afterwards and listen to anything, talk to you, tell you what I know, if you'd like. So I won't leave until folks are through. So Mr. Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you.
For those who came in late, I want to remind you, there's a 3-minute time limit. I also want to say one thing. This is a formal town council meeting. As in all town council meetings, city council, county commissioners. During the public comment period, members of the governing body will listen only and will not engage back and forth with speakers. Who's first? Yes, sir.
Several years ago, I brought some Israeli carp, Aubrey carp up here. And about a dozen of them just to put them in a place, and was told that it's not legal, couldn't do it. So they were put in Greens Pond, and he was amazed at how they cleaned everything up. Now, the fact that we can't put sterile carp in White Lake, I'm watching public television in the northeastern part of the state is putting out hybrid carp in the body of water. I called Raleigh and I said, hey, what gives? He says, well, we can put them when a body of water does not feed into another body of water. So White Lake doesn't feed into another body of water. So what's the problem?
I'll be honest with you, I don't know. I know that in the past, the carp were considered an invasive species, and that's why they weren't allowed. The state may have changed their stand on that. That's a Wildlife Resource Commission question that I would refer to them, that what is going on and what do you have to do to classify to use that. But that's been considered in the past.
You call invasive, that means they're not normal for this area, but they're sterile. They work for about 5 years and then that's it.
Again, I'm not an expert, just what I've read, that they consider them to be, once they've eaten plants and stuff, they will go after the baby fish. And I think that's the more important thing that they were concerned about at that time.
Alan, can you speak into that, please, for the recording?
Okay, for the recording. There have been studies, they're talking about studies for the last 3 years. Let me suggest to you that there's studies beyond 3 years, back to when the lake was in good shape. Last 3 years are studies onto a sick lake. It's just like you have a relative who has cancer and they do studies on the person with the cancer. You need to look back to when they were healthy and see why they were healthy, why they could do what they could do. I commend to you, there are all kinds of reports way back Here's one that just jumps out. Carolina Bay's additional data, their origin and age and history by Wells and Boyce. Back in 1954, they studied the lake. These are scientists. They published these studies. They did a dye test. They said White Lake must be especially dealt with on account of remarkable clarity in water, clear as indoor bathing pool. They looked at the lake and they said that there's water coming in enough that there's a head spring. That's their word. So to test that, they put in 6 wells. These wells had dye. The dye moved the water so rapidly that finally they said, thus, White Lake is thus to be regarded as a huge artesian spring. The clarity of its water could not possibly be maintained on the basis of the slow movement of the groundwater into the lake. So I suggest springs are important. Right now, the studies say that there's just groundwater. These studies back when the lake was healthy indicated no, springs were very, very important. You hear about pH, that it's the acid rain. If you'll read some of the reports that are being furnished by the consultant, you'll also find that the pH of White Lake was 4.3 or whatever through the springs. Well, we have our problem with White Lake because of acid rain. However, if you'll look at one of the reports, Singletary Lake, who gets the same rain that we do, there's a hot spot on that, is 4.3. Something's not right with that. We talk about the boats also. How many boats were on this lake in 1930? Come on now. There are, yeah, there could be people talking about be careful with the boats. Yeah, the boating activity, that is stirring up the lake. Also, logic. When we talk about studies done, good information in, good information out. Y'all have common sense. In December, January, whatever, there are no boats on the lake. Lake's green. Well, if the boats were the cause of all of this, why is the lake green? I suggest there are other folks who do studies that will have results that will be on the science of what the lake was, why it's the way it was.
They said something about the big BP pollution in the Gulf of Mexico. And I read somewhere that amoeba, a little critter in the ocean on the bottom, not on the coast now where the oil slick was big, but since my father was a sea captain, I've always been interested in the ocean. So I read that this little amoeba on the bottom of BP pollution in the Gulf of Mexico ate every bit of this, and it's still going on, eating the hard tar that's on the bottom of the ocean. Can we introduce that amoeba up to White Lake and start eating some of that green stuff? I mean, come on. If it did it in the Gulf of Mexico, can't we get a freshwater amoeba, some kind of critter to eat up the green stuff? I measured the depth of where I could see the water. I put my ruler 6 inches. I couldn't see the end of the ruler. I brought it up to 4 inches right now today at Dr. Walker's. He lives opposite of Tony's. We got a summer place there. And yeah, there's a dock of the bay. We'll go to the dock of the bay. It's green. It ain't worth putting your foot in it. Was it the wind did it, or did that fertilizer do it? That's what I want to know. If it's a fertilizer, stop putting fertilizer on the grass. Let's pour some concrete. He said, don't have concrete because that makes more runoff. Gravel will be better. I'm all for gravel.
On page 8, page 8, areas concerned, the populace of White Lake identified 5 areas of concern. We've been talking about these 5 areas for years and years. But who is to address it? This lake belongs to the state of North Carolina. Isn't it their responsibility, in conjunction with the populace, to find solutions? Overdevelopment of Lake Shore. Don't we control that legally? Lack of public access to the lake. I grew up here and we always had public access. If we want it now, find a realtor or 2 realtors to go out and buy a piece of land. There's always something on the lake for sale. Buy it, state pay for it because they own the lake. Buy it and clear it off and let the taxpayers who own the lake have access to it. They do.
First of all, I would like to thank you for coming out tonight to present it. It does mean a lot to us. I will say it's much more organized. We have heard this before. I know I've been hearing it for 6 or 7 years. I would like to say that we're in a catch-22. The state's not going to do anything for us. We meet water quality standards. If they pull a test, they don't give a damn. Sorry, that's the fact of the matter. We got to make them care, okay? Outside that, what can the town do? I really do feel they're kind of doing what they can, other than, I'm gonna mention this, prevent hard surface runoff. I'm not targeting anyone in here. It's a lot of concrete being poured. That's all I'm gonna say. Look around. Is it running to the lake? Is it running away? I don't know. Hopefully it's running away. So maybe we need to look at some town ordinances there. They're fixing sewer lines all over. Thank you, town. We appreciate that. I feel we've had some leaching through the soil for that. And Sean, I'm gonna burden you with this, and I know you're working on it. Let's create a positive line of communication with the state. I don't feel we've had that, and we need that. Okay, so let's do what we can do, town. We as citizens, and I'm talking about me, and I'm talking about this town council too. Now, some of this is gonna be a little funny, but some of it's gonna be a little true. Do what you can to keep your drainage pipes, your gutters, et cetera, from running into the lake. I'm a country boy from Johnson County. All the water ran to the lake. I don't know where the hell we're gonna send it, but let's try to send it somewhere. Okay. Let's try to stop the runoff from our hard surface as best we can. Let's not pave down to the lake if we can help. I don't know what we can do legally. Wildlife guys here. Got a BB gun and I pop me some ducks in the butt occasionally, run off waterfowl. I do have an issue with the deep draft boats. I have a Ski Nautique 200 runs on top of the water a little more. If you see video, drone video of the deep draft boats on the lake, it looks like they're plowing the bottom. Plowing the bottom of the lake does bring the phosphorus that was flocked or captured and settled to the lake back into the water column. I don't care what anybody says. Who's going to tell a man he can't have his $300,000 boat on the lake surfing? I don't know if we can implement that as an action plan or not, but I do think it makes a difference. And God knows I love my little Nautique, don't get me wrong. Seawalls. Maybe we need to look at a moratorium on seawalls. So what blows north and south doesn't get beat all to hell and just lay there and rot and look terrible and stink. And it looks like we all went to the bathroom next to our seawall. Now, the dog and cat poop's a little tough for me, but I do the best I can, okay? Any animal waste we can keep out, let's try to keep out. Limbs, debris, don't blow your leaves in the lake. I see people doing that. What do you think that turns into? That's organic. Now, I question the fertilization aspect because all of us are a little bit lazy and don't fertilize a whole lot because I don't want to mow my grass. And I got a pretty nice zoysia lawn that filters water, actually. But let's do our best to keep at least a 50 or 75 foot buffer with the fertilization. And I will tell you this, anywhere I've seen really sandy beaches, and I'm going to include Golson's and Camp Clearwater in this, the water is clearer further out. Call me a liar. I don't care what you call me. Get on a boat right out there and look. It's a lot clearer out to those poles. So the seawalls have a little something to do with it. And I do believe that. So I have issues with some of the statements they make up here. How do you state this is history? It's happened in the past and the lake was clear 12 years ago. And then yet you tell me it's deteriorating and it'll never get better. So I struggle with you telling me my lake's going to turn to crap when you also use history to say it looked like crap in the 40s and 50s here or there. About in the 30s and 40s, I apologize. I've taken up too much time. No, I can't take anyone's time, so I'll be finished for the evening. I did not come to instigate. I come to share my viewpoints. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
We have only been here a couple of years full time. But I just had a question about storm runoff, if we could look forward to having a collection system for the rain, the runoff. I know that's expensive. But I do know, having had some experience in my past with wastewater treatment and water, that the more water that you have, fresh water coming in, of course, then everything works way better. So I was just, has that ever been a possibility to come up with a collection system for the storm runoff and all of this that way? And I'm not sure, I don't remember, but I think that you could then you would have a collection system that you could then address the pH and anything else that needed to be adjusted as far as the water coming into the lake. I just wondered, could someone speak to that? And that may not be something that the town can afford right now, but when you think about the lake not being able to use the lake or it affecting things so negatively, then it looks like that might be an idea.
Yes, ma'am. I'd be happy to address some of those, and thank you for your comments on that. I can tell you that the town is very interested in nutrients that run off before attacking them and developing a plan to deal with them before they get to our lake. As you've seen tonight, we are limited on our action steps. Once nutrients do reach the lake, we have to then involve some state agencies, and there are some policies and procedures in place to address those. However, on our side, there really is not a lot of stormwater that is in place currently. Having said that, we do have a Golden Leaf application that we have submitted to do just that. Develop a very detailed and intricate stormwater collection system that we hope can be the beginning of a system that takes nutrients away from our lake, not towards our lake. Thank you.
Good question.
Okay. You're the moderator.
Why don't we do this? To give the folks that want the opportunity, let's do that. And then maybe toward the end, if we have time, depending on how the folks feel, and or maybe a question you could ask alone or on your own when we get through. But let's try that first to give others opportunity.
I'm willing to do whatever needs to be done that our lake doesn't die. And I think everybody in this room feels the same way. And we hear a lot of information every time we come, and we've come before. Is there organization? Is there a plan? Is there anything that we can do as residents to save our lake? Because we're willing to do it, but we hear the information, but we don't hear a plan. I mean, we will submit to whatever you would say, we will change whatever to save our lake. But when we don't know what to do, we go out on our pier and it looks bad, we can't swim. but we don't know what to do. You're going to have to help us know what to do to save our lake.
I'm trying to mouth my response to him, but I'll address that too. I think this document provides some very detailed action steps at the end. Unfortunately, time ran out tonight and we couldn't address those as much in this meeting. But as Mr. Moderator and Mr. Perry mentioned in the beginning of the meeting, all this material will be available on whitelakewatch.com. And I encourage you to spend some time with it because it does list out a lot of those steps that you're asking for, where the public, the town, and the state can all make a difference, especially when we work together like that. Sure. And I do want to, I know this is breaking protocol a little bit, but I just want to say what Mr. Langston said out loud. Coming to the planning board meeting is a great place to get involved. A lot of the policies and ordinances they're developing, both in the comprehensive plan as well as their normal regulatory advisory meetings, they are addressing these issues, and input from the public is always greatly appreciated at those meetings. They're the third Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. here at the town hall meeting, boardroom.
I'm very similar to that lady. We bought property in 1952. I've seen the lake change drastically over the years. We almost bought down at Wrightsville and left. But sentimentality made me stay. I'd do anything for this lake. And I guess that I'm like her. I think your action steps are terrific. I think your presentation has been terrific. I would like to know next steps, like how do we implement those action steps and in what order? And can they be categorized and which ones have the greatest impact that we could do them first and tighter them down? What is our next step?
Well, I think that that's going to be, the report's going to be in the hands of this town council, town commission. And I think that that's the group that's going to have to take a look at that, and just personally think that's the where it's going to come from. You know, we're only doing the report, giving suggestions. It's really you folks and town commission is going to have to take charge and do that. Didn't give you a specific answer, but that's really taking all those action steps and looking at where they could start first and how to get organized into a body that can do that. I think that's going to rely with town council.
Thank you, sir. I think that Mr. Perry and the town, I thank them all for presenting a real comprehensive picture of the situation. And you come down to his conclusion was that we got to work it out with these agencies and so forth. Now, I'm with that lady there. All of us, I think, that here indicates that you're willing to do anything. We've got to have the leadership now say, this is what you need to do. So it may be expensive. It may cost you some more in your taxes or other kind of permits and so forth. But we've just got to get on a regular, got to get on a plan and get it done. I believe every one of you are willing to do that. And I know I am. We'll do our part and let's get with it and get it done. I thank the town and the Lumber River Council of Governments for presenting it this way. But let's get on and do the next step. Thank you.
Thank you. I too want to thank you for coming out tonight. You opened my eyes to some things that I didn't know, and maybe it's the educator in me and creating lesson plans and then teaching them and then being required to reflect on that. As I sit here tonight and I hear people say, what do we do next? He just told you. I appreciate what Bo said because he put most of it very eloquently. They just told you what we need to do. You just don't want to hear it. A lot of us don't want to hear it because it is going to change our lifestyle. We are spoiled rotten. We've been able to enjoy this treasure for way too long. And now we're in a mess and we got to fix it. And it's going to take every one of us being willing to do that. I don't leave here with any questions. I know what it is that I need to do. I think it's just, are the rest of us willing to do that? I appreciate you. Thank you very much for what you shared. I know there are things we can't change. I get that. And those are frustrating to those of us who experience them. And that was part of that moment where we were spoiled. We did get to experience those things and we're very fortunate, and a lot of us are going to have a lot of great memories. But I think if we want to keep creating those memories, then we're going to have to do what we have to do.
Jimmy Carter, who will help us with this, up in his mind, it's, I think we both, we feel in our 60, 40, 30. They have trouble, get on the camera, I know I can use their backhoe, I can use their truck. They don't know what to do now.
Yeah, I just have a couple questions. One is there a way that we can cite the sources? Not only the ones used in the presentation tonight, but also there's reports that are available on the White Lake Watch website. And there's a lot of information there, but the sources aren't cited. I was wondering if we can get those there and linked to where they were cited so that we can see them in context.
The material that we have, yes, if they're cited, they're either going to be in the material that we give the town or where you can find it. But most of those sources are going to be provided. A lot of, as said earlier, there's a lot of old studies, reports, recent ones. That's why the stack is so high, that we wanted to make sure that those things were made available for those that wanted to go back and look at that material. So that will be part of the package that we'll deliver the town.
Okay, and I may have missed that. I came in late, so thank you. And I may have missed this too, but as part of their study and research, have you worked or conferred with the North Carolina State University Biological and Agricultural Engineering Department and Soil Science Department?
No, we haven't directly. We know who they are. We've worked with them in the past, but for this project, we did not.
Okay.
But we used material that they certainly commented on or produced.
Okay. And are you familiar with the assessment of groundwater flows at Juniper Bay and that study that they did in conjunction with the Department of Transportation?
I believe I know exactly what you're talking about, and I believe that report is part of the package.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I just wanted to say one observation about boats, either not for or against. But growing up, we had two large sightseeing boats on the lake. One was the Lily and one was the Crystal Queen. And those boats ran constantly, especially on the weekends. But even during the week, they ran around the lake, and they didn't run out in the middle of the lake. They ran right next to the poles just about, because I did a lot of skiing during that time. And I used to enjoy jumping their wakes when they came by. And there's a lot of muck and stuff that they were churning up at that point. But we still had a crystal clear water at that time. So that was a lot of pollution or a lot of stirring up, that those two big boats were drawing a lot of water and churning the bottom of that lake. But we still had clear water during that time.
Sir, as a matter of protocol, we only were able to allow one opportunity as far as speaking. Is it you that raised your hand?
Just a quick question, if I could. We live on the south side of the lake, which I hate to say it, but it looks like a sewer hole from my house. Is there anything that we can do locally? Just to help from the odor situation? Is there anything at all that we can do personally on that little 50-foot lot that I have?
I'm not really aware of anything, but I agree with you. The predominant prevailing winds and those sorts of things, the south side of the lake gets some of the brunt of it,
Is a
south and
mess,
west,
yeah.
yes.
I mean, I've been reading this magazine, ponds, aeration. I mean, could we do that on individual piers without getting locked by the state? I mean, what can we do locally on a small scale that would just help me survive?
I'll be honest with you, I don't know the answer to that question to tell you what to do.
Yeah, that's.
I'm afraid you're gonna have to direct that to the town commissioners because we were just planners bringing forth information and suggestions and ideas. We are not.
But something like aeration, would that be a possible, any help at all from one side of the lake to the other? I mean, anything, is there any sort of program they could do on a small scale just to see if anything would work on the worst part of the situation?
There may be, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know the answer to that.
Well, I've asked this question one time before, the last time we were here. When's that meeting going to take place? Thank you.
I'm Barbara Smith, and unfortunately, I live on the south side of the lake. You keep saying, clean it up, rake it up, rake it up. You can't rake this stuff. It's just like oil. You take your hand and it just goes right through it. I don't know what the issue is. I'm not blaming anyone. We just want to know what we can do. I have a grandson that loves this lake. Fishes it every time he can get here. He's called Lane over. What are these right here? They look like freshwater shrimp. They are freshwater shrimp. So we have a beautiful lake and we want to help. Just tell us what to do step by step. Thank you.
Hey, I just want to remind you again what Sean said. We've got I'm on the planning board and planning and zoning board, and we meet every Thursday or every third Thursday at 7 o'clock. And we would really love for y'all to come. It's a public meeting. We do have an agenda. So again, if you've got stuff that you'd like to ask questions about or something like that, then letting us know in advance would be best. But again, coming to the meeting is key. I'm glad to see everybody here. It is a complicated issue for the lake. I think what Jim was trying to say earlier, the part, the DRW, the DEQ, there's a bunch of state organizations. We can't just randomly, add fertilizer or add acid or add chemicals or carp or fish or whatever. I mean, take Australia, for example, they've done one thing to treat another. They had to do another thing to treat that. And then, it kind of goes on from there. So please don't do anything without, the town coming together because we want to do this together. We don't want just people shooting from the hip to get things done. You know, you ask, what can we do? You know, you said about the boats. The boats are a problem. Y'all didn't get this big old pamphlet, you know, it's a report that they've got. It's 89 pages. It's very extensive. You just got the PowerPoint presentation. So in this report that's going to be made available on the White Lake Watch website, please take lots of time to read it, because a lot of the questions that y'all are asking is actually in the report in detail, especially dealing with the state agencies and what we can do to get things done. One of the hard things with getting things done is with a state agency, since White Lake is owned by the state of North Carolina, we have to go through general statutes to get things done. For their sake, peer permits cost the same that they did back in the 70s. So, you know, income that's coming from the peer permits and the buoys and stuff like that, it's like twisting an arm to get your permits to increase in cost. Okay, it hasn't changed since the 70s. So, you know, what can you do? Maybe we can ask them to say, hey, increase our peer permits, you know, make it more expensive, because that money is going to go to the state, say, hey, let's regulate White Lake. Because another thing that they said is White Lake is one of many lakes. And quite honestly, because we're so far behind on the regulation around the town, you know, the state's kind of said, you know what, it's kind of a lost cause at this point. Because it's been so tough to trying to get people to make a difference. One of the things that you say, what else can we do? Well, we know that the boats stir up the bottom of the lake. I mean, it's one of those things of like, do we really want to say no boats over a certain size or certain horsepower at White Lake? Would you be willing for that? You know? So those are those things that you've got to come to the planning and zoning board. You've got to come to the town hall meetings. A lot of times I go to town hall meetings, there's 5 people here. There's nobody here. I'm glad to see y'all are here today. I would encourage you to come to the town hall meetings. I encourage you to come to the planning board meetings, because this is how we get stuff done. Your participation, and I appreciate your participation. I'm sorry, when I'm at 3 minutes.
Town hall meetings take place on the second Tuesday of the month at 7 p.m. here in this room. And planning board meetings take place on the third Thursday of the month at 7 p.m. here in this room.
You're welcome. So I think 2 hours is what they were kind of looking at with respect to a time frame, and we are at 2 hours. If there's no other questions, I will say I appreciate your cooperation, and I'm going to turn it back over to the mayor.
Yeah, and I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. I do really encourage you, as was just stated, very well, there are a lot of answers to your questions contained in this. This was a PowerPoint, but there's an 89-page report. Jim, I want to thank y'all again for all the difficult work you've done on this. And before we adjourn, I do want to recognize a couple of people, let y'all know we are working with other folks. Greg Martin, our county manager, is here, and Blake County has been working with us and continues to work with us, which we appreciate. We also have Katie Smith, who is seated in the back, and Katie is Congressman Rouser's aide. They have been very helpful in talking with us about some of the situations at the lake that we've been looking at, including stormwater and runoff and so forth. So, Katie, we appreciate yours and Congressman Rouser's help with that. And we look forward to continue working with you. Again, we appreciate all of you being here tonight. If you have specific questions after reviewing the report, feel free to contact the town hall over here. And again, thank you very much for being here. At this time, there being no further business to transact. And I think as Jim said, if they're going to stay here a little while, if you have some further things that you want to address, and Jim, we don't want to impose on you too much, but appreciate your doing that. So they are available for that. And at this time, I would entertain a motion that we adjourn.
So moved.
Motion second. Second. Any discussion? Not all in favor, indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, like sign. We are adjourned. And again, these folks are willing to answer some additional questions if you would like to. Thank you very much.
I think